Omi, I said I was going to call you Omisade, but I feel so close to you already. I'm like, Omi, I'm so glad to be here with you talking about menopause empowerment, especially on Menopause Empowerment Day. Because as you know, there's more and more resources for women, although we're not there yet on awareness and resources like let's talk menopause.org. Fantastic. And many, many others. But, we just started thinking, what's available to us if we took it to the next level and thought about it as an empowering experience? So we don't have to just be stuck in like awareness and how do I navigate this? But how about if we shift our mindset towards empowerment and what's available to us if we approach the stages from peri to post and beyond menopause from an empowering place? So I would love your perspective on that, what you're thinking from your experience, and then maybe we can talk about some tips to help other women navigate more from an empowered perspective.
Right. Well, thanks for having me, Julie. And I really appreciate this conversation and this line of thinking. Actually, the Black Girl's Guide to Surviving Menopause has never problematized menopause. Our entire platform, which is now 3 years old, has always focused on helping normalize not only the conversations and our understanding about menopause, but also to provide access to information, narratives, data, research, resources that can support people navigating their journey. We choose to do that through culture and narrative shift work. And part of that comes from my work of having done social justice work for the past 25 years. That's been my work, my job. I've worked in the nonprofit sector since 1994, 95. I've done work around economic justice, gender justice, reproductive justice, which is so critical. And menopause is a part of reproductive justice.
Absolutely.
And so what I wanted to be able to offer was an on-ramp, an access point, right? Because I recognize that this is the world that I live in, but for folk who don't live in a world or a framing that is either social justice or feminist or gender equity, then that might not resonate with them. So where do we begin? You begin simply with stories. And that still was also a very intentional thought process because dialogically speaking, popular education, Paulo Freire's Pedagogy of the Oppressed, helps us understand that the best way for marginalized people, oppressed people, to be able to be activated and engage in their own agency and advocacy is first through telling their stories to each other and teaching each other.
Right.
And so everything that we've done with the Black Girls Guide, with our podcast, with our zine, with our IG Live series that we launched back in March, with the advocacy work that we've done, we've been able to participate in some policy work. It's like, how are we making this accessible to all people? And one other thing I want to say, Julie, and I think this is really important for all of the folk who are going to be speaking with you today and all the folk who are going to be tuning in. I know that I'm speaking about menopause from my own experience as a postmenopausal person at this point. I haven't had a cycle since 2013. I'm also speaking as a Black cis hetero person. Not everybody who experiences menopause identifies as a woman. And when we use language like that, we unintentionally engage in the erasure of women identified, femmes, genderqueer, trans, non-binary, gender expansive people. So it feels really important to lift that up as well. Not as something that's an afterthought, but something that's a truism. Right?
Oh, it's an important piece to share here, especially in this empowering conversation. So share with us, what is the expansive language that we should consider going forward?
I think that we can learn a lot from the work that has happened in the reproductive justice movement around maternal mortality, right? So a lot of the language has become much more inclusive and accessible in the last 10 to 15 years by talking about people who are pregnant, people who are birthing. People and folk are gender neutral language.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So that doesn't erase you, that doesn't erase me, and it doesn't erase someone else, right? So whenever I am talking about menopause, when I talk about our guest or our platform or whatever, I always say people who are navigating menopause, people who are experiencing or will experience menopause, people who have uteruses and ovaries, people who are in midlife. Like if I say people, inside of people is me, is you, and it's a whole lot of other people. We also have been very vigilant in who's working behind the scenes. So my team is representative of an intergenerational team of Black folk who are also running the gamut in terms of gender identities and also sexuality. So our team is representative of people who identify as cis, people who identify as gender expansive, people who identify as gender queer. So it's not only the stories that we want to offer to the community, but it's also about how we work. So it's a part of our core values. So a good place to begin, because not everybody's there and not everybody may get there, is to be in a consistent practice of inclusive language, right? And then once you are in a consistent practice of inclusive language, I hope that you're also doing your own study, your own education, your own development of authentic relationships with people who identify differently from you, so that it also becomes an empowered practice. We all have been impacted by patriarchy in this country. Every one of us.
Every single
one of us. We've all been impacted by racism and white supremacy. We've all been impacted by misogyny. So it shows up in each of us in different ways. So everybody has their own journey.
And
I think,
ageism.
right. And I think, and that certainly is one of the offshoots of patriarchy and misogyny, is ageism and the devaluing of bodies, in particular, bodies that are identified as women as we get older.
Right.
Not the same experience that people who identify as men or masculine experience in this country. It's
getting older, exactly.
So as you continue to work with this language, and it becomes more natural to you, then you also will be in this place of understanding, like when you unintentionally misgender someone or unintentionally use language that is exclusive, it's your responsibility then to course correct.
Beautiful. And what I love about going down this path of empowerment and as it relates to inclusivity is because that is where empowerment comes from. The more and this is why we wanted to do this and link arms with lots of different organizations and companies and people who are going through the experience of menopause, because it takes all perspectives to create empowerment, not just one. That's actually not very empowering, in my opinion.
Yeah, I think that empowerment is a pathway to liberation. I think my ultimate goal is not empowerment. I think empowerment is critical, but my ultimate goal is liberation, right? And what does that mean? That means people can live in a country and be free and of fear. Like they feel safe, they feel vibrant, they feel healthy, they feel like they can live where they want to live. They can go to school where they want to go to school. They can marry who they want to marry. And they're not fearful that when they walk out of the door, however they show up in the world, that they will experience some type of violence or harm. So I think empowerment is a pathway to liberation, because empowerment helps people think differently about themselves and the context of the world that they're living in. And it makes them want to stand up differently and be more curious and learn more and be in different types of relationships. So I think empowerment is a critical tool to liberation.
On the path. No, I would agree with you, because if we don't even have that construct in our minds, then we don't even know what's possible beyond that,
Sure.
So,
yeah,
I love it. This is really interesting. I'm so honored to have your perspective and share it, because I think it's really important. I don't know. I mean, I wasn't saying people, I'm such all about women, like, from that generation.
But you should be. And I'm from that generation too. I'm 55 years old. So we're not different generations. I think what's different is that I have been gifted with, and I'm so grateful for people who I'm in relationship with, to remind me that when we say people, that does not erase me. That doesn't mean that I'm not still concerned or fighting for women's health or women's equity. But I'm also very, very clear that inside of women's health, there's a whole category of people who would need to access health care or health support, who don't identify as women, but do have uteruses and ovaries. You see what I'm saying?
Right.
So it's not an opposition to women's rights or women's rights or women's health. It's about health equity that includes all of us.
Right. It's more inclusive. That's really what my big takeaway. And it's funny because, we're doing walks in Los Angeles, and on Sunday, walk and talks about the pause. And I had a man say, hey, are men coming? You know, someone who identified as masculine. And I said, well, no one's asked yet, but, you know, kudos to you for asking. Come on, you know. So, and the word people includes masculine people who don't have a uterus, but care, because every single person knows a person in a stage of menopause.
I absolutely agree. I had someone ask me if the Seymour deck, you know, we created the first of its kind with Kendra, a Seymour deck that has 100 cards. It's never existed before. We're so excited. And someone asked me, can I use these cards with my husband? Are they for men? And I said, nowhere in this deck did we say this card wasn't for all people.
Yeah, beautiful.
Because it's important for us to have these conversations with our husbands, with our wives, with our partners, with our lovers, with our children, with
our sons. I know you have sons like I do, sons and daughters, right?
Yeah, co-workers, colleagues, comrades, like everybody should have an opportunity to engage in a conversation about what does it mean to be in ownership with a changing body? And what does it mean to give yourself permission to love a changing body, to feel empowered with a changing body, and to unlearn what you've been told about a changing body in this culture?
That's huge. You just drop another nugget there. Unlearning. Unlearning, because we've been socialized, trained, beat down to not feel good about ourselves in this experience. And there's a lot of unlearning. I call it, you know, reframing or shifting, but it's unlearning from centuries, you know, generations of women and that go through this. So good. So what you've already shared with us. Let's use, you know, the more inclusive term about people in the stages of pause. Huge, huge, huge. We could just stop right there. I mean, just done, because that's so big. But I know, what else would you like to share with those that are watching this about, you know, navigating and having a more empowered experience?
Yeah. I think about menopause as I know that it's a physical experience, and I've also had the physical experience. I also think about menopause very much as a spiritual experience and an emotional, mental experience. And so for folk who are familiar with the language of liminal or liminality, I think of menopause as being a liminal space, which is the—
Tell us more. Yeah,
so,
that's not—
So liminality or liminal is in between. So if you were here and this is how you showed up in the world, this is how people saw you, this is where you lived, this is what your relationships look like, these are the roles you played or the titles you held, and then you are in your journeying from here to here. The space in between my hands is the liminal space.
I call that the gap. That's right.
And so anthropologically speaking, also people who do work around death and dying understand the liminal space is the in-betweenness between one state of consciousness to another.
Transition.
And oftentimes it can be very challenging. And we have many liminal experiences in our lifetimes, from childhood to being a teenager, from a teenager to adulthood. If and when you decided to have children or not to have children, if and when you decided to be partnered or not be partnered, the death of a partner, the death of parents, the transition from this age to midlife, these are all liminal experiences. And inside of that liminality, it can be very confusing. It can feel very isolating. And you can feel like, I don't know what's getting ready to happen, because I'm being transformed. I am shape-shifting from this place where I was here to the place where I'm going. And I think that what I'm trying to offer folk, and I know that there are other people as well, like yourself and some of the other people that you're going to talk to today, are trying to help people recognize that this is a natural journey. First, this space is natural.
Absolutely.
So you're not entering to something that is unnatural. It's dynamic. So that might mean that the way that you experience it is not the way I experience it. So I want to honor your experience. It's natural, and I want to honor you. The third thing is, I don't want you to think that you have to do this by yourself, because you don't. In the same way that we have birth doulas, full spectrum doulas who provide support with birth, postpartum,
lactation, like all the things.
And I'm also a death doula. So there are people who provide support to people who are making their transition from the world. You deserve support while you're in this liminal space. That is physical support, emotional support, spiritual support, mental support, economic support. You
Mhm.
deserve support in this liminal space. And
Mhm.
so, what I like to offer to people who either are at the beginning of their journey around menopause or full on in it, or haven't yet found their way, but they know eventually they will, is that this is a pathway that doesn't have to be solitary. This
Yeah.
is a pathway where you can have journey mates and you can have access to really good information so you can make the best decision for you around what you want to do with your body. It is again how it connects us to reproductive justice and bodily autonomy. What makes sense for me and what I need for my body as a postmenopausal person will be different from someone else. But
Right.
I should have the right and the agency to be able to say to my healthcare provider, my employer, if I worked for someone, but I'm grateful that I work for myself, or my mental health professional, my therapist, this is what OMI needs.
Yes.
And if you're a team OMI, how are we going to be co-conspirators to make sure that OMI is well as
Right.
I'm navigating this liminal space? And so I think that so many of the conversations that now are a part of the growing menopause landscape help
Mhm.
people think about transformation, help people think
Mhm.
about shape shifting, help people
Mhm.
think about support and agency and autonomy to make the decisions and make the most of them. It's not cookie cutter. It should not be
Right.
cookie
It can't, because we're all individuals. So it's
cutter.
going to be an individual experience that has through threads for all of us.
That's right.
So I love what you're saying is finding that support and knowing you're not alone. And that's why I think having conversations like this that you and I do on a regular basis are
Mhm.
so important, because people do feel alone. They
Yeah,
just do.
it feels
And
scary.
their parents, their mom didn't talk to them about it, or someone who raised them, their grandmother, whoever, they didn't say anything. So, I guess you and I and the others in this area, we said, okay, we're going to talk about it, come
We're gonna do it
on.
different. We're gonna do, and I also, my mother's been an ancestor now for 24 years. My mom passed when I was 31.
Mhm.
Um, and my mom was a registered nurse. So I really do think that the conversations that she and I had around when my period started likely would be similar to menopause, but also because I'm different in the way that I see the world and the way that I move, I would likely ask her different questions
Right.
that would hopefully invite her to be introspective about what this meant for her emotionally and what this meant for her, like on the job. Like, did people treat her different? My
Mhm.
parents got divorced when my mom was about 50.
Mhm.
And so I would really want to talk to her about what that was like. I'm now
Right in
divorced.
the middle of that experience for her,
Exactly.
probably.
Listen, my mother was likely menopause when I started my period. So we were at different spectrums
But
that journey.
yeah.
And I would want to, have that conversation with her. And I know that there are so many people who've shared that their parents didn't talk to them about menopause, but that's for a lot of different reasons. Like, it's not
Mhm.
just they were resistant. Like,
No.
resistant why?
Of
Were
course.
they resistant because they received some negative language or messages around what menopause is? Did their mom or their parent talk to them about menopause? There's a lot of body shaming that also has been a part of our journey as women or women identified people in this country, in particular for Black women.
Well,
We've
that's
never,
what I was going to say for my mom too. Now we're getting off into a whole nother thing. So this is like the show before the show, after the show. But my mom same, but my mom was like, well, yeah, I guess, but I was putting your dad through law school. So I was working, I was raising you and your brother while your dad was doing that. Like, I don't have time for that.
right.
No, there's no luxury. And I think there is, in some ways, to be able to have this conversation
Yeah.
is a luxury, because there's so many women that don't even have a minute to think and stop and pause about what's happening to their body. They're just trying to put food on the table or take care of their kids.
And what I want us to be able to do is to make it not a luxury.
Yeah.
That's why the normalizing of the conversation and the culture and narrative shift work is so critical, because it shouldn't be a luxury,
Right.
right? It should be accessible to all people, no matter their class, no matter their educational background, no matter their gender identity, no matter their age. We
Right.
just interviewed a young person who experienced menopause in their late 20s. Because they had gender affirming surgery because they identified as trans non-binary.
Yeah.
no one was talking to this person.
No one. Yeah.
No one. And so they found themselves full on in the midst of menopause, and they were like, what's happening?
Yeah.
And you know that so many people who experience menopause in their 40s and 50s have the same exact
Are equally confused, but do it in your 20s after such
Can
a
you imagine?
injury?
Can you imagine?
No.
And to have to fight your care providers who are so progressive in one way,
Right.
but in another way are like, oh, well, I mean, you got the surgery that you desired. You should
Right.
be happy. You shouldn't complain.
But dismissive, and also because they're not prepared to have that conversation
They're
anyway.
not.
We know all that too, so.
They're not. They're not.
Oh my gosh, there's so much here. I know we're gonna have a separate conversation, the two of us on another platform. So I guess we'll have to wrap it up, but Omisade, thank you so much. Your perspective is such a gift, and
for gathering us.
Oh, I feel honored to just, say hey to all, I consider my pals, my friends, in this place, so we can all share our view on this. And so every woman can find herself in something that someone shares. So I'm really grateful for your time and your brilliance, your heart, just so your spirit also. I really feel that. So thank you so much. And to be continued, and happy Menopause Empowerment Day on your way to liberation for all the people.
Yay!